right. Grace and peace to all you out there joining us online. Grace and peace to everybody here. Everybody here this morning, God bless you. I did want to go ahead and let you know or remind you that we are having VBS this coming weekend. That is Friday and Saturday. Friday night at 6 p.m. here at the church. New Testament Church, 1508 or 1510, whichever one you decide to put in the GPS there. Hargrove Avenue, 1508 Hargrove Avenue. And Friday night, 6 o'clock, Saturday, 4 p.m. And I think we're going 4 to 8. I think we're going to try to cut off around 8 or 9 o'clock. But we'll have lots and lots of good stuff going on Friday and Saturday. And, of course, obviously join us for Sunday morning service as well, 10 a.m. We'll be jumping in with the theme from the weekend. So that's kind of how we've been playing it the last several years. So like I said, come out and join us. We'll have food on both nights, so don't worry about having to feed the little ones. There'll be some grub, and like I said, lots of activities on Saturday especially. We'll have some water slides and all that good stuff. So we're amped, we're excited. Hope to see you all there. Tell all your neighbors, kids, and your cousins and aunts and uncles and in-laws and outlaws and everybody else. Praise God. All right. So this morning, you'll have to bear with me a little bit because I'm still kind of formulating this idea or this thought, right? So following the thread that I had, that kind of hit me over the last week or so, and it's an idea, right? I'm chasing it, right? It's an idea, yeah, it's an idea. I'm hunting this deer. I'm hunting this idea. I'm hot on its trail. But it started with a devotion that I read from a book that I've been tracking in with that was written by Henry Nouwen, or however you say his name. And he was a mystic. He was a priest or a monk, and he was one of those guys that just, man, when he wrote stuff down or whatever, it was just like, it was unbelievable. You're like, where'd this guy get this stuff? I mean, obviously he's gotten it from reading scripture and things like that, but he's drawing on things that, that most of us don't see, right? If in that sense, he was a mystic, right? He was able to understand things that were beyond our, everyday comprehension, right? So, and he was one that, Brennan Manning studied a lot, or actually I think he knew him personally, like they knew each other personally. But regardless, he gleaned from him, and some of his writings and things are influenced by him and Thomas Merton, obviously. All those guys kind of in the same wheelhouse, so to speak. So the devotion is, I'm going to start with that. I'm just going to read it so you can kind of know where I'm coming from. But it says, sharing our weakness. Over the last few years, I have been increasingly aware that true healing mostly takes place through the sharing of weakness. Mostly we're so afraid of our weaknesses that we hide them at all cost and thus make them unavailable to others, but also often to ourselves. And in this way, we end up living double lives, even against our own desires. One life in which we present ourselves to the world, to ourselves, and to God as a person who is in control, and another life in which we feel insecure, doubtful, confused, and anxious, and totally out of control. The split between these two lives causes us a lot of suffering. I have become increasingly aware of the importance of overcoming the great chasm between these two lives, and am becoming more and more aware that facing with others the reality of our existence can be the beginning of a truly free life. It is amazing in my own life that true friendship and community became possible to the degree that I was able to share my weaknesses with others. Often I became aware of the fact that in the sharing of my weaknesses with others, the real depths of my human brokenness and weakness and sinfulness started to reveal themselves to me, not as a source of despair, but as a source of hope. As long as I try to convince myself or others of my independence, a lot of my energy is invested in building up my own false self. But once I am able to truly confess my most profound dependence on others and on God, I can come in touch with my true self and real community can develop. And so what I do, I'm practicing to be a licensed therapist. So I'm a clinician. And the reason that people come to me is to do exactly this. They come to share their weaknesses, right? They come to share what it is that is troubling them, what it is that is bothering them, what it is that is eating them up or tearing apart their family or, stripping away their sanity from themselves. And so, just in thinking about kind of what I do day in and day out and then, or what I'm practicing to do, and then, reading this, it really, because I've been to therapy myself, right? And when you go to therapy and you start to kind of unload some of the thoughts that you're having, which, by the way, it's just thinking, right? It's just thinking out loud. You're sitting there, and if you have a good therapist that does more of what we call talk therapy, then they're not really going to say a whole lot. They're not really going to offer a whole lot, because the reason that we're there is not to tell you what to do. It's just to guide you, right? Kind of keep the guardrails up so that you don't go off into oblivion with some of your thoughts and ideas, right? Because they can get away from you, right? Your thoughts can get away from you. Your thoughts can take you places that you don't want to go. That's why we have to bring every thought into subjection, right? We have to take and analyze those thoughts, arrest those thoughts, right? And interrogate them. I think that's the Greek word there, is actually you have to interrogate every thought that comes up, right? Maybe not every thought, but most thoughts, right? When you start running wild in your head, you got to start catching those thoughts and saying, hey, what's up? What are you doing here? Why am I thinking this? What's going on here? Why is this running through my head? And where is this taking me, right? And if it's no good, you throw it out. I tell people all the time, like, a lot of times when I meditate, I will imagine that there's kind of a fire burning down here in my belly, right? And thoughts that are coming up are like the smoke that's coming out of the fire. And there may be an element to the fire, or to the smoke rather, or to the thought that lends itself towards, sadness or anger or something like that. So I like to imagine that it's a different color, right? So each thought, maybe it's envy or, something like that. Those thoughts are coming up. And as they're coming up, I imagine again that they're this smoke, and then I watch them from my belly to my head and my face, and I let them sit there, and I think about that, and I dwell on that for a moment, not too long, right? Because again, those thoughts can take over, and they can take you places you don't want to go. So I'll let that kind of linger there for a moment, and then I let it fly away, right? Just like the smoke at a campfire, you watch it drift away. And you let those thoughts go. The ones that you arrest and you say, well, this is no good. You're interrogating that thought. Why is this here? Does this make sense? Can I compare this to the truth of who I really am as a child of God, right? So regardless, you're coming to therapy, you're talking, you're thinking, right? You're throwing those thoughts out there, right? And this is someone who's, hopefully trained. They got some experience under their belt, and they know, kind of how to guide you through those thoughts and ideas that you're having. But what you'll find a lot of times in sharing those things is that you have the answer. You've got the answer to your own problem. It's actually on the inside of you. It actually dwells there. But the problem is you can't find the answer when it's all packed down with everything else that's in you, okay? So all the other thoughts and emotions and feelings and all the things that are swirling about in your belly or in your mind, right? The things that are rolling around in there, it's kind of like your clothes in the dryer, and you're looking for one sock, right? Which we know the dryer eats anyways. I mean, ain't no finding those socks, you ain't gonna find those socks. You got 12 pairs of socks and none of them match because all the pairs got eaten up, right? But you always get one back. You got these lone socks, right? So you just, I don't know, you cut those up into leg wraps. That's what I used to do when I mowed grass. I'd cut the tube sock and pull it up my leg, but I'd wear shorts and when I was a kid, and because it was hot, it was too hot to wear pants, So it's like, well, I'll just pull these up here, and then when I'm done, I slide them down. We go on to the next property or whatever, and so they call me the Mummy Man or whatever. I mean, yeah, it's funny stuff, but that's what you do with those spare socks, by the way. So you have, all this stuff that's tumbling around on the inside of you, right? In your mind, in your heart. You're mulling things over, so to speak. Or perhaps you're ruminating, right? Which is where you dwell on ideas that are not so great, and you're letting that eat you alive and, make you angry and frustrated and sad and all these different things. But all that stuff's tumbling around, it's rolling around, and you're looking for that one idea. You're looking for that one thought. You're looking for that one answer. Well, you can't find it when it's all wrapped up in everything else that's going on. So what do? You have to take it out. You have to take everything out, right? You have to take all of the things out. To stick with the laundry analogy, you can't dry your bedding with your clothes, right? It would take forever. Every woman in here knows it's going to take 4 years to dry a comforter and your clothes all at the same time, right? And by then, you'll have burned the dryer up and burned the house down and everything else. So you don't do that, right? If somebody does that, if somebody stuffs too much stuff in the dryer, you go in there and you take part of the load out, right? It's going to be wrinkled. Yep, you got to deal with that. You got to iron that stuff out too, right? Yep, you got to get the iron going. That's a whole nother layer. See, Margie's helping me with my thought here. We got a whole nother branch to the tree. So I told you, look, we're chasing this thing, right? All right, so how do you do it? Well, you got to get it out. You have to kind of dump those things that you're feeling. And to Nouwen's point, you have to share your weakness. And the problem is, and this is where we get so wrapped up in what we look like, what we sound like, how we come across, how we're perceived or whatever by others. And we're so, enthralled in, am I presenting myself properly? Do they really know who I am? Or a lot of times it's more like, do I even know who I am? And then I'm putting out this false persona, right? This false self. I'm putting a facade out. I'm wearing a mask, however you want to say it. But that's the problem, right? We are so wrapped up in what others may say or think. And there's a element of community that, you can't determine, and just to kind of, I don't want to get, wrapped up in too much stuff here, but when you think about sexuality and things like that, that's part of the argument on the other side of the fence, is that I can be what I want to be, right? Based on how I feel today, or based on what I think that I was born as, or whatever the case is, right? And the trouble is, you're not the only one that's determining who you are. It takes a community of people to help you understand who you are, right? Of course, it takes God, obviously. God's going to give you He does give you your I amness, right? He's the one that you're born out of. And so you are a child of God, but then we have these confusing moments that happen in our life. Maybe it's family. Maybe it's an experience with your parents. Maybe you didn't have parents at all. And then that, fractures your identity so you don't understand who you are. And so you have lots of people telling you who you are or who you could be, right? You have lots of people pouring into your life in many different ways. Not necessarily always in good ways, right? They're not always telling you, how great you are and how much potential you have and things like that, right? They may be telling you the opposite. They may be telling you you have no potential. You have no worth. You're never going to do anything. You're never going to make anything of yourself. That may be the things that get poured into you, and then that, again, fractures your identity, right? And that's where you start to develop those pieces of the mask that you're putting on, or the pieces of the false self. It's kind of like Frankenstein's monster, right? And you're the doctor, by the way. You're Dr. Frankenstein. You're putting this thing together. And it's not always your fault. So, and I'm sorry, I keep kind of jumping on to different things there because I want you to understand, I guess, as a clinician, right, it's incumbent upon me to make sure that I'm as clear as possible. That, and as a pastor or as a preacher, I want to make sure I'm as clear as possible. It's not always your fault. When you're piecing together this mask that you wear, when you're piecing together the false self, you're not always the one who brought the parts to the table. Someone else maybe handed you that, right? By what they did or said, by what they did not do or did not say. Because as a child, and it breaks my heart because you hear things when you're in the counseling room, or when I talk to other therapists or whatever. I had a therapist tell me the other week that there was this little girl that she sees, and she asked her, she said, and by the way, this little girl was not talking at all, okay? First 2 sessions, she didn't say a word or whatever. What little bit she did say, the therapist had to drag out of her, At one point, she asked her what her favorite restaurant was. And in the next session, she's like, well, what was the name of that restaurant that you like so much again? And the little girl said, you should know. I told you already. Whoa. Okay. This is a 9-year-old, by the way. And she was like, oh, yeah, you're right, but I forgot. And she's like, well, I'm not going to tell you, but I will tell you it starts with an M or something like that. And it was like, whoa, hold on. So a couple sessions later, they're playing a game. And she says, just out of nowhere, the little girl says, did your dad tell you that he loved you when you were a little girl? And, the therapist said, yeah, well, I mean, sometimes, yeah. And she said, does your dad tell you that he loves you? And she said, well, I know that he loves me. She said, but when I say, I love you, Dad, he says, thank you. She didn't pick that part. She didn't pick that part of the mask. She didn't pick that limb of the false self. That was handed to her by somebody else who's also hurt, who's also broken, because hurt people hurt people. That's how it works. Okay? We only know what we know. So, that tells me that more than likely his dad never told him that he loved him. More than likely, right? Probably had a terrible relationship with his father, if he even knew his dad. But the point is, it's not always your fault. You're not always the one that's responsible for this mask that you wear or for this false persona that you put on, okay? But the way that we overcome this identity crisis, right? The way that we overcome the brokenness that we feel, the way that we overcome all of the confusion that surrounds who we are, because everything's swirling on the inside of us and we're not understanding, which way is up, right? We're just spinning round and round and round. The way that you overcome that is by expressing it. And, it's like, well, where do I express it? It's like, well, you can express it to God. And yes, you can. And that is something you should certainly do. Henry Nouwen and many others, obviously, but Henry Nouwen, Brennan Manning, Merton, they all were men of prayer. And that's one of their biggest things is you should be praying. You should be praying all the time. You should have a constant communion with your Father. But you should take those times, and there's I think I've talked about this before, but I've done this little Catholic thing. It's like they call it Exodus 90 is the name of the thing, but it's for men, and it's just basically a daily. It's not really a devotion, but it goes along with the prayers throughout the year. But anyways, part of that is their recommendation is at least 20 minutes of silent prayer every day, where you just sit, you don't say anything, you're just sitting there with God, right? Sitting there in His presence, knowing that you're in His presence, knowing that He's close to you, knowing that you're close to Him. And so prayer is great. Prayer is wonderful, and you should pursue that daily. But there is another element to, releasing or relieving yourself of these things. and that is sharing your weaknesses with others, right? Finding trusted people in your life that you can share your brokenness with, that you can share the places where you're weak at with. And so we have a really great example of that in the Scripture. And it's not, we don't really see a lot of the, the conversation and things like that between David and Jonathan, but we can understand by some of the things that are written in Scripture how close they really were, right? And the fact that Jonathan loved David so much that he would literally tell him everything that his dad was doing and saying, right? And he's like, my dad trusts me with everything. He will tell me anything, and I will tell you. I'll let you know what is up, right? Because obviously Saul was trying to kill David. But so let's talk a little bit about Saul right quick before we get into David and Jonathan. So Saul in 1 Samuel 9. Really 9 and 10, I guess. But 1 Samuel 9 is kind of where we get the start to Saul's career as king, right? And we won't read a lot of this, but you can hear some of it, so that you kind of know where you're at. So 1 Samuel 9 and verse, let's just say 2, he had a son. Kish, that is. So Saul's dad had a son, obviously. Kish, he's of the tribe of Benjamin, had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man and a goodly. And there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. For his shoulders and upward, or from his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people. And the asses of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. And Kish said to Saul, his son, take now one of the servants with thee. Arise, go seek the asses. And so the rest of chapter 9 is basically him going and find his dad's donkeys, right? Because I know how uncomfortable people are with me saying asses repeatedly in church from the pulpit. So Samuel in chapter 10, I'm sorry. Later on in the chapter, they're trying to find these donkeys, right? And the servant says, well, what if we went down here to see this guy, this prophet or this seer, Samuel? Like maybe he would have an answer for us. And Saul's kind of him hauling back and forth. He's like, well, I don't know. Maybe not. We don't really have anything for the prophet. We should be taking him a gift. And then the servant digs around in his bag and he says, well, I got a couple pieces of silver right here. And he's like, all right, well, that should be good enough. So they go down to see him. God had already prepped Samuel, the prophet, with the news that a young man was going to be coming to see him the next day. So Saul shows up, and God speaks to Samuel, and he says, that's the guy I was talking about. All right? So Saul comes in, and basically Samuel says, hey, I'm supposed to anoint you king. You're going to be the big bad to do. You're going to be the Misa Big Bad and Boston or something like that, whatever it's called. I don't remember. It's Star Wars. Sorry. So, he's going to be the big bad boss. He's going to be the guy, right? Because God said to Samuel, he said, my people's cry has come up to me. I've heard what they want. Now, obviously, God didn't want them to have a king. He wanted to be their king. He wanted to be the one that ruled over them, or with them, rather. And but the people kept asking for it, right? And he said, well, I've heard, son of a gun. That's a doggone wasp. I about got stung. You just never know what you're going to see in church. Praise God. That's the devil trying to get me. All right. So, man, that scared the life out of me. No, I'm just kidding. So Saul said, oh my gosh, God said, my people's cries come up to me, I'm gonna make them a king, or I'm gonna give them a king. And for whatever reason, right? Maybe it's God to prove that, hey guys, you know what? I'll give you what you want. It's like your kids, right? They're asking for this, they're asking for this, they're asking for this. It's like, all right, fine, have it. Here, learn your lesson. And or whatever. But maybe not. I don't know. So Saul comes in. Samuel anoints him. In chapter 10, he pours the oil over his head, kisses him, tells him to go and basically go on some missions. He's got some things for him to do. When he finally returns home, right, his dad's like, where have you been? And he said, well, we were looking for the donkeys, and I became king. And, of course, it's like, what? It makes you think of like Don Quixote, like this dude is living in a fantasy world or whatever, like he's in a dreamland, That's not a princess, that's a hooker. So he's like, what are we talking about, So long story short, Saul becomes king, right? He's ruling over the people, and of course the biggest enemy during that time is the Philistines. The Philistines keep coming at Israel, right? They're trying to take the land, trying to knock them down. Over and over and over, you see these campaigns by the Philistines trying to take out the Israelites. And in the process of time, there's a battle that comes along, and then we have this young shepherd boy named David, he's going out to the battlefield and to feed his brothers, to give them food or whatever based on his father's commandment. And he's shocked that the children of Israel, that the men of Israel, the children of God, the children of the living God are scared of this dude named Goliath, right? And so you guys know the story better than I can tell it, but part of that story is Saul, because David wants to go out and fight the giant, he says, well, at least, for the love of God, put on some armor. Like, you're wearing a robe, man. You got shorts and a T-shirt on. You go out there and fight this guy. He's got a sword, a shield, a spear, a M16, a grenade launcher. He's got a tank behind him. I mean, what are we doing? And he's like, get down, get to the chopper, because that's what Saul sounded like. He sounded just like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I didn't know if you knew that or not. But he's like, put the armor on. Get on the armor. Pick up the sword. And so David's like, nah, bro, like I can't do that. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. And so he tells him, no, I can't wear the armor, right? Because I can't move. I can't do my sling right? I can't see anything because this helmet's too big, right? It's the whole thing. Then he kills Goliath. And it's not long after that Saul becomes jealous of David. In fact, it's basically immediately after that. Saul becomes jealous of David. And let me make sure I'm in the right spot. And so he kills Goliath, and everybody's excited about all that. And Saul is somewhat surprised, I'm sure, afraid, right? Because at this point, it's like, this guy did something that I couldn't do, right? Or I wasn't willing to do, or I wasn't brave enough to do. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 18, it said, when David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house, talking about David. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David and his armor, even his sword and his bow and his belt. David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. As a result, Saul set him over the army, and all the people, even the servants of Saul, approved. As they were coming home, when David returned from killing the Philistine, the women came out of all the towns of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they made merry, Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Saul was very angry. For this displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s. I just lost my place. Oh, and to me, they have ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul eyed David. You know what I'm saying? He gave him the eyeball. He gave him the side eye. He gave him the side eye. Stink eye. He gave him the eye. I'm watching you, boy. Saul eyed David. From that day on, right? The next day, this is so fast how all this happens, right? The next day, an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house, right? And I'm not talking about the oots, 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 not that kind of rave, right? He was going nuts. He was going nuts, right? He's freaking out. While David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day, right? Because he was a musician. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul threw the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice, which means he threw 2 spears. Like, I'm going to pin that fool against the wall. That is a thought that should be arrested and let go. All right? Don't hold on to that one. That's what we call in psychology an intrusive thought. Those are things that you don't act on. That's the thought where it's like you're over there chopping cucumbers on the cutting board and your husband says something out of line and you think, well, I'm going to throw this thing across the room, chop his head off. Like, you don't act on that as much as you would love to. Oh, my God, I would love to pin you against the wall right now. Right? No? Just me? Okay. No, not me. My wife. Just kidding. Oh, man, we've been getting on each other's nerves so bad here recently. We're so ready to be done with selling and buying a house and moving. It is like, I can't even express to you how done we are right now, right? We are literally, our hands are like this. They're like this all day. Just, God. Oh, my God. God. Oh. If I could just, one more word. We're just stuck in it, you know? Got nowhere to send this frustration. Because we're not willing to take it out. I'm sorry. We're not willing to express it to other people. We're not willing to express it when we're at work or whatever. So we're just like, when we're at home, we're just like, and then we're like, oh my God, I love you. Come here and hold my hand. You know. Come here and sit on the couch so I can strangle you. I mean, hug you. You know, like, that's where we're living right now. And there's no furniture in the house. God! There's nowhere to sit, you know. Okay, sorry, there's couches. There's nowhere to eat dinner except in the floor, because we sold our table and chairs like a bunch of idiots. So Saul is, you know, he's ready to, he's like, David, and so he's ready to absolutely annihilate this kid because he's jealous, right? He's jealous because of his ego and his fear, right? And there are always, maybe not always, but a lot of times, those things are at play in our own lives, you know, kind of day in and day out. And it's maybe more so when we're around certain other people. But there's always kind of this, there's the ego, right, which is the part of you, again, this is the facade, right? This is the face that you put on. This is the mask that you wear. And it looks pretty realistic, but it's not really you. It looks like it could be genuine, but it's not really you. And so ego plays a part, and then fear, right? Saul, of course, is afraid that if David comes into power, right, well, I'm going to lose all my power. And granted, you know, if you're not king anymore and somebody else is king, it's like, what power do you really have? But that's also not to say that, you know, someone wouldn't say, well, come along with me, right? Rule with me or help me or whatever, right? You would imagine that in this case, David would probably say, hey, Saul, if I'm going to be king, I need to learn some things from you, right? Because David seems to be that guy, humble in that sense, right? God, teach me. God, teach me to shepherd the sheep, right? God, teach me to care for these little ones, these ones who can't fend for themselves, these ones that can't do anything, you know, without my protection, right? They can't go anywhere without my protection. Help me to learn to shepherd these. That's David's humility. That's kind of what he lives in, right? Where Saul is not so much in that mindset anymore, right? That frame of mind. And so, of course, you have these attempts to kill David. Yeah, you have these attempts to kill David. I mean, one of them was crazy. I mean, I would have quit right then and there, you know. But David's like the leader of the army, and Saul's like, I don't even know if we should go here, but Saul's like, hey, I need you to go kill a bunch of Philistines, and you got to bring me 100. You know? Did you catch that? Okay. Yeah. You got to bring 100 of those back, okay? All right? The skin of a member of a person's body. And I need 100 of those, okay? I don't know, like, there's not a guy in here, I don't think, that wouldn't fight to the death to maintain that, okay? All right? So, like, that's going to be difficult. 100? Really? 100? 100. Okay. It's a lot. It's a lot of skin. It's a lot of skin. It's disgusting. It's scary. It's scary. All right. It's very unsanitary, it seems like. But anyway, so he says, I need 100 of those in an attempt to get him killed, right? Because he's thinking, like, if he goes out here and tries to get, yep, he's going to get slaughtered by somebody. Somebody's going to take that fool out. So that's not what happens, right? He actually accomplishes it. Good for you, David. And then later on, when he marries Michal or however you say her name, Michal. When he marries her, then Saul sends an assassin to try to kill him, right? And you have these multiple, and obviously he tried to kill him himself directly, like, I'm going to throw a spear at you, by the way, you know. And then, of course, David's fleeing. He's running out. He's running away. He's trying to survive just a little bit longer, right? Trying to hold on so that hopefully this guy will regain his sanity, you know, and he'll come back to reality. Hey, man, I was your friend. Remember the guy who used to play the harp, put you to sleep? God, now you're trying to kill me. So all the while, David has developed this relationship with Jonathan. And again, it doesn't really tell us why, you know, David and Jonathan were so close, why they loved each other so much. But there was something about David that Jonathan said, man, this guy, man, he's my brother. He is like bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Like I could be one with this man. And the Bible said that he loved him as his own soul, right? And so you have this one that's come along to help Jonathan. At times he's like, man, your dad's losing his mind. He's trying to kill me. He's plotting against me and this, that, and the other. Of course, Jonathan's like, oh man, no, far be it from you, far be it from him. You know, I can't believe this. He's like, I'm telling you, man, I swear on my own life. And Jonathan's like, oh my gosh, you know, this is serious. And so he understands, he comes to understand. Obviously, later on, or as the story goes, you know, Jonathan and his brothers are killed in battle, and Saul ultimately kills himself, commits suicide. Falls on his sword. He's done. And of course, David becomes king of Israel. But there were some interesting things that I picked up, you know, through this story, or these stories, I guess, and some connections that I made. So when we think about Saul, you know, like I said, he's very egotistical, and he's also insecure, right? He lives and operates in his own fears. So much so that he would send an entire army out. And look, I'm sure back in the day it was like you don't necessarily send the king out to fight the guy, but at the same time, he's sending everybody else out, unwilling to go and fight the fight himself, right? And again, there's probably a lot of historical stuff there that doesn't mean anything. But when it comes down to us, right, a lot of times what we will do is we will stand way back here because we don't want the conflict, right? I'll let others handle it, or I'll avoid it, whatever it is. I don't want the conflict. I don't want the fight. I don't want angry shouting and yelling, and I don't want this to come to blows, and I don't want those things. We avoid those things typically, unless you're a highly disagreeable person. Then you may not necessarily avoid it. But Saul, he's egotistical. He operates in fear, where David doesn't seem to be that way. He seems to have lots of courage, right? He seems to be very brave. Just the stories of killing a wolf, killing a bear, saving his sheep, being willing to stand in the face of imminent danger against, opponents or against things that would seek to tear him apart and certainly could tear him apart. But willing to fight, willing to go to battle, and even, of course, the Goliath story is the epitome of that, right? So David doesn't seem to operate in that at all. And then, of course, you have Jonathan, who is there as the support, right? He is this loving friend who is constantly there for David, and he renews his covenant. Well, I think twice technically they sort of have this covenant, right? They have it the first time, and then again later on when Saul's trying to kill David, there's a renewal of that covenant, and it's just firmly planted in this friendship, firmly planted in this love towards David. Again, a love that's so great it's as if he's loving himself, right? Closer than a brother, absolutely. And so when you look at Saul and kind of what he was pursuing, early on before he became the king, he's there with his dad. His dad says, go and get the asses. They've escaped, And that word there, if you trace that, the root of that Hebrew word, it means permanence, or something permanent, specifically a chieftain, okay? And so what we understand about Saul in his egotistical way is that he was pursuing some way or some form of permanence in his power, right? In the chieftain, in the strength that is Saul, or that was attributed to him, right? The strength that was attributed to him, he wanted to solidify his place in history as the king of Israel. Not only the king, but the first king of Israel. He's the man, right? The man, the myth, the legend. There is some part of him that wants to solidify all of that. That's that ego operating, right? That's that ego in operation. And for us personally, within our own lives, our ego, and of course the fear. So our Saul, right? Our Saul seeks to exact dominance over us. Our Saul wants to be the one that is in control. The false self, the part of you that is not really you, is the part that wants to stand out in front. And of course, we've talked about this somewhat too with, what's it called? Internal family systems, right? Internal family systems says that there are parts of you that are all fragmented and broken up, and they play these various roles, and one of the roles of these parts is protector. And what they want to do is they want to protect the child that is within you. So you are a child of God. That's your truest identity. And with that, this part of you that's seen you harmed in the past wants to protect you. And that's great. That's wonderful that you have some defenses, right, for yourself, so that you're not necessarily harmed, or at least not unnecessarily so. But the problem is that part of you starts to take control. That part of you takes over. Now you can't have proper relationship with folks because they're not getting to know you, they're getting to know parts of you. And not only are they getting to know parts of you, they're getting to know the wrong parts of you. The parts of you that really don't reflect who you truly are. And not only that, they're the parts of you that are playing the wrong role. They need to be flipped into a completely different role. And you probably would look and act and sound like a completely different person if they could see the real you, the true you. David's willingness to share his weaknesses, right? To commune with Jonathan, and even beyond that, the writing of his Psalms, all of the things that he pours out before God, the Psalms of lament, right? All these things that he's unloading, right? His willingness to share that weakness makes David who he is. It keeps him from wearing a facade so much. It keeps him from wearing the mask so much. And so we get to see the real heart of David. And I think that's part of the reason that God told Samuel that he would be a man after my own heart. You're going to anoint David king, and he's going to be a king after my own heart. He's going to be the one that is pursuing after me, not after his own egotistical permanence or dominance, not after his own name being written down in the history books, but he would be known as a man of God. He would be known as one that pursued God, and despite all of his flaws and all the things that he did wrong and all the many people that he killed or had killed and the unfaithfulness and so on and so forth, despite all of that, he's still going to be a man after my own heart. And the reason, that, again, this is to flow in this idea, the reason is because David was willing to shed the armor of Saul, shed the armor of the ego, shed the armor of fear that someone would come along and snatch away the thing that I have. Because that was Saul's problem. Well, don't you know that God gave me this? Don't you know that God anointed me king? Well, I can't have this boy coming up in here snatching away the thing. Do you hear what these people are singing out here? They're attributing 10,000 to David, but only 1,000 to me. Are you kidding me? Look at everything that I've done. Look at how great a king I've been. Look at how far the kingdom has come because of me. He's scared. He's scared to death that someone's going to come along and snatch away the thing that he loves so dearly. The thing that he's tied his identity to, right? Well, that's what we do. We do those things. My job? I'm fired? I'm laid off? Wait, no, I put my whole life into this thing. I've been here for 25 years. I've been here for 40 years. Are you kidding me? You're going to tell me to leave? No, I can't do that. No. And what happens? Our world starts to crumble, right? You're going to take away, sometimes it's friends, it's family members. You're taking these things. No, you can't take this from me. You lose your money. Forget the job. You lose your money, right? I got no money. Well, we tie our identity to those things. We tie our ability to make money. How much money we have, how many homes we own, how many cars, how nice of a car we drive, how many cars we own, right? The placards and the certificates that hang on our wall. We tie ourselves to those identities, or tie our identity to those things. We tie ourselves to those things. That's not who you are. That's not who you are. But that's what Saul says. That's what the ego says. That's what that pride says. That's what the fear of you losing that thing, because you think so highly of that thing. You think so much that that is you. You are scared to death, literally, to lose it. And when you lose it, and I've seen this happen, people have done that with a marriage. I'm not saying that you being married to your spouse is not a wonderful thing, that you can't find, at least part of yourself within that other person, and all those things that go along with being one with another, right? That's all wonderful stuff. But there are people who will get married because they're wrapped up in this thought that that marriage is my identity. That's who I am. I'm the wife. I'm that wife. I'm that husband. I'm this person's husband, specifically. I'm this person's wife, right? They'll even wrap themselves up in the identity of mother and father to their children. And yes, that is a role that you play. That is a thing that you do. And it is part of your identity. You can't necessarily strip it away from you, right? It's sewn into you. It becomes part of you. But it's not who you are. It does not define you as a person just to be mom or just to be dad. But some people will wrap themselves up in that. They get so consumed by that. And then when it's taken away, whether that's forcefully or through a divorce, or perhaps, their children just leave when they get of age, they leave, right? Because, oh my God, my parents overbearing, or what, my mom's overbearing, this, that, and the other. I can't deal with it anymore. I can't be under your thumb anymore. I can't live under your shadow anymore. And so I'm leaving. And when you see that, their world crumbles. When those people run away, when it's stripped away from them, their world crumbles. That's not who you are. And that is something that I think David understood. He didn't necessarily ask to be king. He wasn't even qualified to be king. They didn't even have him in the room. He wasn't even in the lineup. And yet God chose him. God chose him. God gave him his identity. God gave him his I amness. God gave him the ability to do the job of the king, but that's not who he was. Right? So, Saul, let's see, let me jump into, we're almost done. I know what it was. So there's this thought in the Jewish interpretation of, in the Mishnah, I think it's Avat 5:16, which is the Hebrew Scriptures. But in the Mishnah, the commentators say this: whenever love depends on some selfish end, when the end passes away, the love passes away. This is talking about David and Jonathan. But if it does not depend on some selfish end, it will never pass away. Which love depended on a selfish end? Which love depended on a selfish end? This was the love of Amnon and Tamar. And which did not depend on a selfish end? This was the love of David and Jonathan. And so what we have to do, and again, I talked about sharing your weakness, and we read, what Henry Nouwen had to say and how he had found within the sharing of his weaknesses healing. That God had brought healing to his life in that he was able to pour out his brokenness to someone else, to another person. And his point was, that we have to understand our dependence not on ourselves, but on God and others. So the second part of this, yes, you get your identity from God. Yes, you depend on God. Yes, you pour yourself out to God, but you have to be willing to pour yourself out to others as well. In the process, you will develop community. But it takes a sacrifice. And I heard Jordan Peterson say, he said something like, sacrifice is the foundation of community, or something along those lines. And it was like, boom, it just clicked. I heard it after I was studying this stuff. And it was like, man, that is it. If you're willing to sacrifice your ego, if you're willing to take your Saul to the altar, if you're willing to take the fear of shame, the fear of being found out, your fear of being thought less of, whatever the case is, right? All those fear, the fear that someone, because you admit to your weakness, something that you love and adore is going to be stripped away from you. If you are willing to sacrifice that fear, what you will find is healing. What you will be given is healing. Again, this has to be done with someone who is trusted, okay? You can't just go blabbing your stuff to everybody, all right? Don't listen. Hey, we don't need to see the headlines on Facebook of your life. Right? That's not what we're talking about. There is a such thing as oversharing, right? There's an oversharing, or there's a such thing as oversharing, whether that's on social media or with other people, right? Hey, man, look, I don't need to know how many times you went to the bathroom today. right? I mean, I can tell y'all how many times I went to the bathroom today if you really want to know. You didn't act too offended by that. Maybe that's something y'all enjoy hearing about. But I don't need to know every little detail of your life. However, if you're willing to share your weakness with me, I am willing to receive what it is that you have to say, what it is that you have to share. And I am willing to be there to catch you, right? Because you're going to feel like you're falling. It's going to feel like, because you're walking around on this crutch, right? You're walking around on the crutch of your ego, of the mask, of the facade, of the false self. And so it's going to feel like when you finally say it, you're going to feel like you're falling. But all at the same time, you're going to feel light as a feather. Because you're going to start to feel the burden of the weaknesses that you have within yourself. You're going to feel that lift. And so you have to find someone that you can share those weaknesses with, right? And Jesus is certainly at the top of the list. And you have to find others who have Christ in them, right? Again, that spirit is there. You got to find yourself a Jonathan. Now, Jonathan obviously is David's companion. He's his brother, one that sticks closer than a brother, really. And he's like the Holy Spirit, right? Within that story, he's like the Holy Spirit that comes alongside us and helps us, comes alongside us, hears what we have to say. And even when we don't know the words to say, we have an utterance that comes out. We start to speak in a completely different language, right? When we don't know what to say, the Spirit will make the utterance for us. The Spirit of God will begin to speak out of us, and we'll begin to kind of unload. You ever notice how light you feel after you've been in prayer, or you've been in maybe a church service where it's like, man, I felt that, and that Spirit came out of me. I started to speak in tongues, and a lot of times that's just the Spirit of God saying or making those utterances that you can't even say. Or maybe you're not willing to say, right? And again, you're too afraid to say, because the Saul, the ego, right, is scared to death, afraid of losing whatever it is that you think you have some permanence, right? Because it is kind of chaotic when you start to share those things about yourself that you hide in the dark. It's kind of chaos. At that moment, it's like the violent shaking that took place when they were trying to break the sound barrier. I can't remember the dude's name that flew the plane. Chuck Yeager. When Chuck Yeager was trying to break the sound barrier, the plane is shaking, and the people before him, they weren't willing to push the throttle any further because they thought this whole thing's going to fall apart, all into little pieces. It's going to be total destruction. But what Chuck Yeager had the courage to do, right, that nobody else did, was to push that throttle forward and to go ahead and say what needed to be said. And what he found on the other side was smooth sailing. Peace. Peace. That's what he found. That's what you will find if you're willing to share your weaknesses. That's what you will find if you're willing to pour out your heart and to say to people, I'll model it for you this morning. You're my friends. You're my friends, right? Okay, God, wake up, guys. Jeez. I know you're hungry, but yeah, I got one over here. I don't know. All right, you're my friends, okay? You're my Jonathan. Okay? One of my weaknesses, and I'm working on this. See what I did there? See what I did there? See what I did there? Working on this. What is that? That's a facade. That's a facade. That's a mask. Okay. My weakness is the desire or the need to be liked. That's one of my weaknesses. I have been so willing at times I have been so wrapped up in the need to be liked that I've been dishonest. That's my weakness. I'm a highly agreeable person. Part of my struggle when I was a manager, well, I guess technically I'm still a manager, but when I was a manager in the equipment company, part of my struggle, and granted, listen, again, there's a lot to this. It can be complex, right? I was young. I had very little to no experience as a manager. I was a lot younger than most of my employees. And so when I would have to sit someone down and have a conversation, Michelle knows what I'm talking about, and have a conversation about behavior, or you've been late, or you did this wrong thing, or whatever, you keep doing this, whatever it was, right? Part of my problem was I didn't want to hurt nobody's feelings. I didn't want to make nobody mad because I didn't want them to be mad at me. And I may not even been the one that had the problem with whatever it was. It's the company, right? Or it's my boss saying, hey, you got to go deal with this. Go fix this. And so in an attempt to play both sides of the field, right, I would sometimes send a unclear message to the employee. Now, I learned pretty quickly that doesn't work. I just have to be straightforward. I got to tell you how it is. And that's why I said I am working on it. I continue to work on this. I am still a work in progress. God continues to break me and then make me over as He sees fit. But that is the sharing of your weakness. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. It's not just, hey man, I had a bad week because blah, 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 whatever, That's good. That's good. It's good. Share your frustrations with your friend, with your spouse, with whatever, right? But we're talking about the things that eat at your soul. We're talking about the things that if you could just say it, if you could just take this part of the mask off, if you could just strip away that part of the monster that you've put together, you would feel so much relief. And you know it deep down on the inside of your heart. If I could just release this, if I could just tell somebody, right? It's Edgar Allan Poe's, oh my gosh, what's the name of that story? Where the guy kills the guy and he puts him under the floor, and the police come, and they're looking for this gentleman, and he killed him out of jealousy, and whatever, and so they're coming to look for the gentleman, and they visit a couple of times, and finally at one point the guy can't sleep, he can't go about his day because all he can hear in his mind or in his ear is the thumping of the man's heart under the floorboards of his house. And the police finally come, or I'm sorry, they come the last time, and he just loses it, right? Oh my God, how do you not hear that? Do you not hear that thumping? Do you not hear? I mean, just rip the floorboards up. I know he's alive. And that's how they figure out, that obviously he murdered the guy. Telltale Heart, that's it. Yes, such a good story. You need to go read it. Telltale Heart. But those are the things that plague us, right? They eat at your soul. It's like if I could just that's why confession of sin, confession of missing the mark, confession of coming short, whatever, right? Confession of sin is so cathartic, right? It has a healing element to itself. But when you can not only confess, those sins, just the things that you did wrong or the things that you left out or whatever, but that you can confess, this is where my brokenness is. This is where it comes from, right? This is my heart right here. If you can confess those things, then you will find that healing. And Paul said in 2 Corinthians 12, he said, it would be inappropriate, this is in the Message, or the Mirror Bible rather, it would be inappropriate for me to boast about anything as though I achieved it by my own doing. My confident persuasion in what I have received by revelation of the Lord is not to be confused with arrogance. Again, setting aside the ego. I know an encounter in Christ 14 years ago where a person was translated into the third heaven. Only God knows whether it was in the body or out of the body. It does not really matter to me. This person was caught up into paradise. There he heard words that could not be articulated into language. He understood a conversation that did not originate in human thought. Of this encounter I will confidently boast because it has nothing to do with anything that I did to promote myself. I would rather glory in that which emphasizes my failure to get it right by myself. Divine revelation is gift, not reward. Even though I have legitimate reasons to boast, I prefer not to. My life speaks for itself, and I have nothing to hide. In sharp contrast to these spiritual revelations, the physical pain that I suffered and my severe discomfort momentarily distracted me. It was as if the old mindset of accusation persuaded me that this affliction was actually God's way of keeping me humble. And that's what your ego will do. Your ego will tell you, oh, no, you don't want to reveal that. You don't want to reveal that. No, you need to hide that. Don't let them see that you're limping. Don't let them see that you got a bad knee, you got a bad hip, you got a bad ankle. Don't let them see that you can't lift that, because the moment that they see that, they will perceive that you're weak and they will tear you to pieces. The moment that they see that, you will not be trusted anymore. The moment that they see that, they'll render you incompetent. They will turn it into your thorn. He says, finally it dawned on me that grace is God's language. Grace is God's language. He doesn't speak thorn language. He said to me, my grace elevates you to be fully content. And now, instead of being overwhelmed with a sense of my own weakness, He overwhelms me with an awareness of His strength. Oh, what a bliss to rejoice in the fact that in the midst of my frailties, I encountered the dynamic of the grace of God to be my habitation. To be my habitation. You're the place where God's grace lives. You're the place where God's strength lives, and that is where you derive your strength, from God's grace. It is only by His grace and only by His mercies that we're not consumed, we're not overwhelmed, we're not overrun by these things that plague us day in and day out. That's the only thing. And guess what? When you can find communion with someone else to share that weakness and to say, you know what? This is my thorn. This is the thing that has been plaguing me. This is the thing that I can't seem to let go. I can't seem to turn loose of this resentment, this hatred, this aggression, this anger, this sadness, whatever it is. I can't seem to stop people pleasing. I can't seem to stop whatever. You name it. You name it. Can't seem to stop. If you can release that to someone else, share your weakness, you will find healing. You will find a restoration. God's not mad at you. God's not upset with you because you have these weaknesses. He told Paul, it is in your weakness that I am made strong. In this moment, when you're feeling weak, in that moment, when you're feeling broken down because of the things that you can't seem to get right, or you can't seem to or you keep seeming to leave left undone, it's in those moments God said, I'm the strongest. If you'll be willing to step into your weakness, shed the armor of Saul, shed the armor of the ego. Shed the weapons of the ego. Because what we do is we protect ourselves not just with the walls that we put up, but with the weapons that we draw when people try to get too close. It's like a bear getting backed into the corner, a wounded animal, right? Get backed into the corner. Don't touch me. Don't come close to this. You don't want to see this. You don't want to touch this. Now, the good news is Jesus said He does. And that's why He was willing to be the example to us and to take on our weakness, our frailty, and to show us that this is how you do it. It's not by the armor of the Roman soldier. It's not with the sword and the spear. It's not riding in on the stallion. That's not how you do it. You do it in your brokenness. That's where God's might and power is found. It's in your brokenness, in your weakness. And one of the things that I often find is that people will take things like pop psychology and stuff like that, and they'll say, well, this is my thing, this is my problem, this is my OCD tendencies, and blah, 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 whatever. And all you're doing is taking that facade or that false self and you're propping it up. Stop propping up your false self. Stop propping up or trying to revive or what do you call it? It's not revive. It's whatever he did to animate. Stop trying to animate this dead thing. Frankenstein's monster was dead, right? It's a bunch of dead people's body parts, And he tried to, in the story, he's trying to make this thing animated, bring it to life, It's alive! That's Igor's line, right? It's alive! Yes, master. Okay. Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. Don't be Igor. He's creepy. Don't be Frankenstein. Don't be Frankenstein's monster, right? Technically, you are Frankenstein. You're the doctor, okay? You're the scientist. But stop animating those things. Stop propping those things up that are not really you. The things that are not you. And you know what they are. You know in the moment. It's like Jordan Peterson's rule in his first book is tell the truth or at least don't lie. It's a good rule to live by, right? Tell the truth or at least don't lie. And you know when you're lying. You know the feeling. You feel it down in your gut. And I'm not talking about just, you ate the last Oreo. We know you did. That's when that, right? Look at this. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. It's not that. It's your willingness to show your woundedness. Your willingness to show your woundedness, to show your weakness. Because it's in weakness you find your healing. When you share that weakness, when you unload that burden from yourself. And if you're the person that's receiving those things, know that you don't have to carry those things, okay? You're there with the person to receive it, right? And to help them put it down. Listen, we're going to put this down right now, and we're not going to pick it back up again, okay? When we leave the room, when we leave the altar, when we leave your house, when we leave from lunch today, we're not going to pick it up again. I'm helping you put this down. I see you put it down. I watched you put it down. Now don't pick it back up again. Right? Well, that's what I had to say today. I hope you're blessed. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon and the rest of your weekend. God bless you to all those who joined us online. Please like, share, subscribe. And don't forget the VBS. VBS this Friday, Saturday. Friday at 6, Saturday at 4. Saturday at 4. Friday at 6, Saturday at 4. Water slides, food truck, ice cream, all kinds of stuff. Be here. Friday at 6, Saturday at 4. I love him because he first loved me. God bless you.